Whether it's Russia's invasion of Ukraine,
After months of preparations, the Russian President Vladimir Putin has launched a major military operation against Ukraine.
Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
the unrest in the Middle East, or growing tensions between the US and China,
China was by far the biggest abuser in history. It was being hurt very badly. They were closing up factories. They were having a lot of unrest.
the world feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for something to snap, or more accurately, in this case, for a third world war to erupt. So far, humanitarian efforts and global diplomacy have managed to hold back the worst. That may be why we've gone nearly 80 years without another world war, especially considering the first and second were just 20 years apart. But are we nearing the breaking point? Are global alliances and treaties losing their grip? Or is the countdown to a catastrophe being driven more by fear-fueled headlines than actual threats? There's no debate, World War II was catastrophic. But beyond the destruction, it was also a turning point in global politics. In a strange way, the loss of nearly 3% of the world's population became the catalyst for sweeping changes aimed at preventing another global conflict. One of the most significant developments was the creation of the United Nations in 1945. It was born from the ashes of its failed predecessor, the League of Nations, an idea championed by US President Woodrow Wilson, though ironically, the US never joined. This time, the global community promised things would be different. The goal wasn't just cooperation, it was prevention. At the heart of the UN is the Security Council, often referred to as the UNSC. It was tasked with the crucial role of maintaining international peace and security. Peacekeeping missions are just one part of its job. The Council is also meant to intervene when conflicts threaten to spiral out of control, to stop one nation from dominating another by force. One recent example? The Russia-Ukraine war. Since Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022, the UNSC has stepped in to coordinate humanitarian aid, condemned Moscow's actions on the global stage, and referred key issues to international courts. On the surface, these efforts look like progress, but scratch a little deeper and the cracks begin to show. But why hasn't the UNSC done more? Why haven't troops been deployed to halt Russian aggression? The uncomfortable truth is that the UNSC suffers from the same fatal flaw that sank the League of Nations: power without unity. And at the center of that flaw is the veto. Russia, as one of 5 permanent UNSC members, has veto power that means any resolution, no matter how widely supported, can be blocked by a single no vote. And that's exactly what happened. Russia vetoed any binding resolution against itself, and the UNSC, by design, had no choice but to comply. The United States labeled the invasion unprovoked and unjustified. The United Kingdom called it an assault on democracy. France described it as a violation of the UN Charter. But none of them could enforce action. Why? So what's really stopping Russia from taking Ukraine outright? After all, Russia possesses the largest arsenal of nuclear weapons on Earth. If it truly wanted to, it could wipe Ukraine off the map. What's holding them back? Mutually assured destruction. President Vladimir Putin has made it clear Russia isn't bluffing, but launching a nuclear weapon would invite retaliation. If one nation fires, others will follow. Someone might technically win, but at what cost? Entire cities, economies, and even ecosystems could be lost. Victories would be meaningless. Still, the fear of Russia igniting a wider war isn't unfounded. As of 2022, Moscow has aligned itself with China and North Korea, nations that also possess nuclear arms and oppose Western influence. If Ukraine becomes the flashpoint for World War III, we could see China move on Taiwan and North Korea advance into South Korea, a domino effect and a nightmare scenario. This fear is not new. Decades ago, to contain the Soviet Union, the West created NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, fueled by America's Marshall Plan. NATO is built on one principle: collective defense. If a NATO member is attacked, all members respond. That's where it gets dangerous. If Russian troops harm NATO-aligned forces in Poland or the Baltic states, Article 5 would be triggered. and that could bring the full weight of NATO against Russia, escalating the war into something far more devastating. Putin may not be bluffing, but he's not reckless either. He knows that pushing too far means facing not just one rival, but much of the world. We all grew up learning that war is terrible. It is taught, discussed, and remembered as something to be avoided at all costs. In fact, the very idea helped shape the creation of the United Nations Security Council. But here is something many don't realize. War, under certain conditions, can be perfectly legal. This happens when all 5 permanent members of the Security Council agree that military action is necessary. If there is no veto, Chapter 7 of the UN Charter kicks in, giving the green light for international intervention. In other words, a war approved by global consensus. To understand how this might play out, imagine a scenario rooted in real-world tensions. Picture the Middle East, specifically Iran. For years, the United States has accused Iran of supplying arms and financial support to proxy groups across Iraq, Lebanon, and Yemen. Iran has denied these claims, but has not hidden its disdain for Western presence in the region. At the same time, the United States has had military backing from regional rival Saudi Arabia. Needless to say, Iran and Saudi Arabia are far from friendly. Now, suppose the situation escalates. Iran is accused of launching ballistic missiles into Saudi territory or attacking American troops stationed in the region. The United States takes this to the Security Council, asking member nations to unite and take action against Iran. Normally, China and Russia would be expected to veto such a proposal, but in this case, both countries are already deeply involved in other conflicts, with China focused on Taiwan and Russia embroiled in Ukraine. They choose not to intervene, seeing a future advantage in staying quiet for now. With no veto in place, the Security Council officially authorizes military action. War is now legal. But to think Iran would accept this without retaliation is wishful thinking. Tehran would likely respond by activating its network of allies. Hezbollah could launch attacks against Israel. Houthi rebels in Yemen might step up their strikes on Saudi and Emirati targets. Militas in Iraq would be mobilized. What starts as a single flashpoint quickly spreads across borders. This is where things become dangerous. A war that is technically legal could spiral into something far worse. One nation's aggression draws in another. Proxy battles erupt into regional conflict. Global alliances are tested. What seemed like a controlled response becomes a chain reaction of violence and chaos. Iran might appear isolated on paper, but in practice, any conflict involving it would ignite broader confrontations. In today's interconnected world, a single military strike can trigger waves that reach across continents. The idea of a third world war no longer feels like fiction. It becomes a possibility shaped not just by brute force, but by timing, alliances, and the absence of a single veto. And once that door is open, closing it again might be impossible. A recent YouGov survey revealed that between 41 and 55% of people in countries like Britain, France, Germany, Italy, and Spain believe that another world war could break out within the next 5 to 10 years. That is nearly half the population expecting global catastrophe in the near future. But are these fears based on actual geopolitical realities, or are they the result of something more subtle and psychological, an information war of a different kind? There is no denying that the media holds tremendous influence. It shapes not only what we know, but also how we interpret the world around us. Information does not arrive in a vacuum. It's framed, filtered, and repeated in ways that evoke emotion. The line between delivering news and influencing thought is not always easy to see. Take the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, for example. Do people form their opinions based on first-hand knowledge and impartial analysis? Or are they influenced in how the story is being presented? Is support for one side a reflection of deeply held beliefs, or is it the result of constant exposure to headlines and images that guide public sympathy? studies have shown that repeated exposure to media coverage of armed conflicts can significantly increase stress, anxiety, and even symptoms of trauma. This is not just speculation, it's backed by psychological research. The more people are bombarded with images of war and chaos, the more likely they are to internalize a sense of looming danger. Fear sells. Crisis dominates the news cycle, and when every day brings new reports of invasions, missile strikes, and military escalations, it becomes harder to separate what is likely from what simply feels inevitable. In this environment, panic is not just possible, it is profitable. In a world gripped by rising tensions, the threat of a third world war feels more real than ever. But fear alone is not proof of inevitability. While global flashpoints multiply, so too do diplomatic efforts and deterrence built over decades. What we face is not just a military standoff, but an information war, shaping our perception of conflict. Whether we edge closer to war or pull back from the brink depends not just on leaders, but on all of us. So ask yourself, are you being informed or manipulated? Is war inevitable or just being sold to you? Let us know what you think in the comments. And if you found this insightful, subscribe to Dominex for more untold truths behind world events.